great questions. There's been some questions that potentially we're not able to answer for legal reasons. But yeah, we'll try the best that we can. Yeah, looking forward to this.
That must have been on his contract when he joined Liverpool. You will have every Saturday 12:30 kickoff, no matter what, no matter where.
If you're a manager and you sign a 12-month rolling contract, that means basically every day you wake up, you have another 12 months on your contract. So it's sort of never ending.
How does the audience get more of the raw emotion? And maybe you've got to go to those moments closer to the game where the emotions are still real, you know, if the player's still on the pitch. Welcome to Whistleblowers, a new regular feature that we're introducing to Breaking Lines podcast, where myself and Gary Rabbit come together to answer your questions about the world of football management, coaching and performance. Now, we don't claim to have all the answers, but through nearly 2,500 games that we've been involved in and over 50 years in the game, we've seen and experienced plenty. So now it's over to you. Each episode, we'll crowdsource the content topics and we'll give you our insights on your queries. Everything from team management to daily training content, how top players prepare, to what do the different members of staff do from day to day. So follow us on our social channels and send us your questions. We hope you enjoy this episode. And welcome everyone to a new feature here on Breaking Lines podcast, where we're going to give you, the audience, a chance to ask us questions about some of the burning issues that you've had running around in your brain and you'd always have liked to ask a manager or a head coach as to whatever that topic might be. So we've crowdsourced all of the questions for these episodes. So it's all the questions have been submitted by you guys out there who've been listening to the episodes as they've been going out and come up with some of the queries and the ponderings that you'd like us to answer. So we're going to get straight down to it. Hopefully, obviously, this is going to be a regular series. So if you don't have your question asked today, obviously you can submit it another time. But let's get straight to it. Morning, Gary. How are you?
Morning, Dave. How are you? I think you missed a little bit out there as well. You can also be aimed at head of performance as well. You missed that bit out, as if you were going to get away with it. Like, it can't all be people wanting to know everything that or my opinion, if you like. So yeah, no, I think this is going to be an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, there's been some great questions. There's been some questions that potentially we're not able to answer for legal reasons. But yeah, we'll try the best that we can. Yeah, looking forward to this.
Yeah, we've had to filter some of the questions. They're either a little bit too close to the bone, or they might implicate somebody. And obviously, here in the UK, we don't have the Fifth Amendment, so we are going to have to just ignore those questions that we can't answer. But so we've taken the questions from a variety of sources. We've got Twitter, we've got Instagram, we've got people who've contacted us on LinkedIn, people who've messaged us. So some have only got nicknames, so we can't give real names, but we'll try and reference them. Hopefully none of them have got connotations that we don't understand. So when we give the names, hopefully you could honestly think that we haven't had to filter the names. So we'll get straight down to it anyway. So first question in, it's a lovely one from Blaine22. I think this one's an Instagram question, and it's straight to you. What influences how a manager lines their team up? Do they go with the strengths or highlight weaknesses of the opposition to exploit? So that's straight over to you, Gary.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that comes in many sort of guises. You know, it depends on who you're playing, how good the opposition are you at home, are you away, what stage of the season. But generically, I think it starts with the opposition. I think you always have to try to allow the team to feel like you're playing to your own team strengths. And I think that's what you always try to do. You can't suddenly change every week for the opposition in your style, because from a learning perspective, from a coaching perspective, that's obviously, you know, lacks consistency and therefore is going to dilute how good your team are and perform. So I mean, it starts in the sort of pre-match build-up meetings, where you would tend to load the meeting maybe 60-40, so 60% of the opposition's weaknesses, 40% of the opposition's strengths. Because, of course, if you make the opposition look and feel like they're so good, there is an element of your team feeling negative going into the game. So I think when you pick the team, you have the base of your team in your mind. You have the core elements of how you want to play, both with the ball and without the ball, and the little bits in between transitions. But you also have to look at, what areas of the opposition can you exploit within that. But I think it has to be based around how your team play. You can't just, like I said, some managers do it, don't they? Like, when opposition have one attacker, they'll have two central defenders. If an opposition have two strikers, they'll have three central defenders. So they'll change all the time. But I think I've always felt that continuity and consistency is important. And so you find the balance, I think I would say. You find the balance of ways to exploit the opposition, but you can never go away too far from your core principles of how you want to play. Otherwise, your team feel like you're changing for the opposition all the time. And I think that has a negative consequence from my experiences. So yeah, probably a balance.
I think this goes back to one of the first episodes I think we ever did in season 1, where we were talking about, again, this type of topic about how you would set up. Do you go with what you need to do, or are you also like catering for the opposition? And I think out of that we came that you're also trying to second guess whether they're going to change something to deal with you as well, because they're going to be, on the flip side, trying to predict whether your strengths and your weaknesses are going to be something that they're going to exploit by doing something different. So it's a kind of constantly moving feast, isn't it? Like, what are they going to do? What are you going to do? It's a game of chess.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And I think we've also had it where you're playing against a team and maybe you've adjusted more than you normally would for the opposition. And suddenly you start there, you've worked all week, multiple sessions on how you're going to exploit, combat, deal with what they will do. And you turn up and within a minute, you realise they've changed formation and changed quite a few players. So I think that's why you have to always have your team and how your team wants to play as a core principle. But for example, I'll give you an example. If you're playing Man City away in the FA Cup, I think you would have to be pretty naive to think we're just going to go there and we're just going to focus on us. We're just going to do what we do really, really well. Because ultimately you're playing against a team that are much better than you and have different ways of hurting you. So at that point, you have to think about the opposition and you have to think about making some adjustments to give you a chance to compete. And that's where tactical nuances and tactics come into play. That's why managers have to shape some tactics to exploit weaknesses and some tactics to actually give you a chance to stay in the game. It's as simple as that. So yeah, really, really balanced approach. I mean, but I would probably say 80% of it is how you want to play and the strengths of your own players, because, for me, that's, of course, the most important.
I think with teams like City, and I suppose every league has its extremes in terms of those top teams who play in a certain way, or not even the top teams. You find certain clubs or managers that play in a certain style, and they're also used to having every other opposition that they play try and find different ways of suppressing their style. And they actually become quite good at being able to deal with almost anything that's thrown at them. Man City, you've seen in this year where I think it was early season, they played against Burnley, who decided to play man-on-man across the whole pitch. And within 10 minutes, Pep Guardiola is having to figure out, okay, this is something relatively different that we haven't experienced before. And very quickly, they're having to manipulate in-game. For all of the preparation you would have done to play against Burnley, you probably didn't expect that.
No, but I suppose if you're a Man City, one thing that you do know is if you look at, you're the best team, if not one of the best teams, that teams are going to have sort of a couple of, probably 3 different ways of playing against you, which at the start of the season, you're probably going to have to work very hard in training to have a plan to combat. depending on what they do. So you would start the season already knowing what some of the challenges will be. You know that a team's going to turn up and are going to try and press you to death, like you say, man to man, really high, disrupt your build-up patterns and not allow you to get into any sort of rhythm. So you know that. You know there's going to be teams that will be somewhere a lot deeper, sit around the edge of the box, compress the spaces around your area and make it very difficult for you to play through them. So again, you have ways of breaking that down. And then there's probably the teams that are somewhere in between. So even though you have to look at the opposition, I suppose the start of a season, you look at different challenges around how you play. So if we're playing 5-2-3, you know that teams are going to try and build wide and try and overload spaces wide, because you've only got your wing backs truly in those areas. So you're already trying to second guess what your problems are going to be in games. So I suppose a very, very good team already has the solutions to a certain degree, already has the answers. So therefore, game to game, you don't need to constantly change. All you're saying is, look, this is how we press a back four. This is how we press a back five within our parameters of our formation. So I suppose there's a little bit of both. It's preparation, it's good coaching, it's good work within the week. But you always have to look at the opponent, don't you? I hear managers saying all the time, we just concentrate on what we do. You're like, that's great, but really you're missing 20-30% of an opportunity to also exploit the opposition. Even if you purely concentrate on how you play, you're still looking at where are the gaps in build-up, where are the opportunities to attack, where are the weaknesses. So yeah, there's so many different nuances around, aren't there? I think often when you hear comments, sometimes they're more to shape the psychology of how they want their teams to be portrayed. I heard Postecoglou say the other day, almost dismissive of set pieces, because for me, he wants his teams to be known as a pure total football team. Now, I can't believe for a second that he is dismissive of set pieces, because of course 20-30% of goals even in the Premier League are going to come that way. So I think sometimes what people say and what they actually do are maybe for a little bit of psychology and a little bit of the media's effect.
Yeah, maybe a bit of a smoke screen there, but definitely a really interesting topic. And thanks, Blaine, for that question. Hopefully we've answered that for you, and it gives you a little bit of food for thought if you have to pick any teams yourself. Anyway, we now pivot. We're going down the canal. That's the name of the person who's given us the next question.
Worrying name?
Well, yes. Well, we'll cast no aspersions as to where he's got the name from. But anyway, this is one that really, I suppose, you're going to have to answer in the main. I suppose I've got an angle on it as well. But the question is, when a manager is sacked, are they told what they can and can't say?
Yeah, really, really interesting one, because I think there's a lot of preconceived ideas and notions around some of the things that go on in football. I think these are great questions because we can give a little bit of an insight. I think that we're okay to do that because they're quite generic answers to a certain degree. I think most managers, there's different ways, but I think most managers will sign a contract when they go into a club that will say, essentially, let's give you an example. So if you're a manager and you sign a 12-month rolling contract, that means basically every day you wake up, you have another 12 months on your contract. So it's sort of never ending. However, if a club wants to come along and say, you've done a fantastic job, we really like you, we want you to be our manager of our club, they can pay 12 months compensation. So that's a really clear and easy way of doing it. If a club wants to say, the flip side of that is if a club says to you, you're not doing very well, and it has happened to us before, we don't really see, the results. We're going to sack you. We made a decision. We now have to give you 12 months money. So it works both ways, and that's how most clubs set a time scale in the contract. So it works both ways. Within that second, it's interesting really because it tends to be loaded in the club's favour, I think. But I suppose it works both ways. And part of part of the way that they do that is they say, we will make this payment based on the fact that you won't make remarks or comments around the club that are disparaging, damaging, whatever way you want to come in. In other words, basically, you can't really say anything about the parameters of how you are sacked to a certain degree. Obviously, you can talk about certain instances. And usually the club are probably not quite in that situation, so they can maybe say a little bit more, but usually as a bit of a sort of agreement, nobody, basically nobody slates each other. Nobody has bad words about each other. And I think then you can go on to manage with a bit of a clean slate, and they don't get perhaps a heat and the reasons why you've done it. So I know sometimes that's probably very frustrating for fans, because of course, when a manager leaves under different, let's take when we left Birmingham, and Gianfranco Zola replaced us. Most fans at that point would say, okay, that's a strange sacking. We want to know why you sacked a manager, or we want the manager's opinion on why he was sacked. And of course, at that point, you can't really give it. Now, maybe a few years down the line, you can give a little bit more context to it. So I think there's another part of that. And again, I'll just sort of go over the whole of it, and then I'm sure you might want to add one or two things to it, Dave. But there's also part of it as well where managers can get that payment sometimes in different ways. So sometimes you can be put on gardening leave, which is a little bit similar to most people in work, where you only get paid if you don't then get another job. If you suddenly get another job after a month, you stop getting paid by that club. And that's why a lot of managers you see probably out for about a year to 18 months, because there's times where actually they probably can't afford to take the new job because it doesn't pay as well as the setups on the old job. So that's just a little insight. Sometimes you get it with no gardening leave. So you get your money whatever happens. And then often a manager you'll see will jump into a job that maybe you think, I'm surprised they've taken that a month later, because they've already got maybe 12 months money from their previous club. So they just want to continue to work. They don't need to make those decisions financially. So a little, I suppose, very similar to someone leaving a big organisation where, you have to protect that organisation and that person going on and either working very quickly or not, depending on what the circumstances are. So yeah, that gives a little bit of a little peek behind the curtain, I suppose, of what happens and why most managers can't really say what they would like to say.
Yeah, I think what people have to also understand is it is just pretty much standard employment law. It just is that being applied to the professional sports world. And in any organization, if there's going to be a parting of the ways, so to speak, then each side is probably going to try to agree to, leave on best terms that they can. Obviously, not everybody's going to be happy with the situation, especially the party that might be a grievance for why they're having to leave. But I suppose football is one of those where it's so public. It's not everybody in a role who's getting, potentially thousands of people asking for their removal from their job. But when it does happen, yeah, I suppose that when it comes down to those non-disclosure agreements that become part of the severance or whatever the agreement might be, that we all agree to kind of go about our way and not say nasty things about the other party. And also that you're not giving up some of the trade secrets that they might have, especially when you work in some quite innovative clubs where they're doing really interesting stuff. There's an agreement that you won't start talking about what they do behind the scenes, because a lot of that work could be proprietary, intellectual property comes into it, of how they might be going around things like recruitment or performance or medical situations that are private and need to remain private. And it's only right in some ways that the clubs sometimes are able to protect that information from getting out, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, to sort of caveat that, I think most people that get us, like we've had it before, where often when you get a sack, often it ends up being relatively fine. Like you sort of understand at that point. Let's take sort of Birmingham and Stoke, probably two very different scenarios. Birmingham was perhaps a little bit more of a surprise, and at that point, perhaps there's a frustration in that you'd been sacked not down to results, so therefore you'd like to give a bit more insight to people as to why that happened. I think that's only natural, but you have to obviously abide by the sort of legalities of it. Whereas Stoke, in some ways, as frustrating as it was, and it still felt a little bit harsh, but you could understand it. Results weren't quite where they were. We understood the parameters going in. And actually, often at the end of those scenarios, they're quite amicable, aren't they? You're not sat there both having a blazing row as they're sacking you. Often, you're shaking hands, say, look, it's fine. I understand it. The clubs are often very, very good in terms of making sure that everything's done properly for you. You know what I mean? That's been certainly my experience in it. But sometimes, even though those decisions you perhaps disagree with, the clubs are actually very, very good and very honourable. They're not trying to stitch you up, or they're not trying to take money away from you for whatever reason. They're happy to say, look, it's our decision. It's important that you get whatever's rightfully yours and whatever your own, like you say, like in any employment law. And I think usually both parties are quite keen to just move on, and actually move on in a respectful way, because the clubs don't want an ex-manager bad-mouthing them on the back of it, and I don't think that's necessarily fair. And as a manager, you don't want the club bad-mouthing you as you leave, because you got to think about your next job as well. So yeah, I think the fans would love the entertainment of both the club and the manager having a war of words in the press. It'd be fascinating, wouldn't it? It'd be excellent. But unfortunately for now, everyone's going to have that same LMA statement of, I'd like to thank everybody, blah, blah, blah. There's always little veiled bits in them, isn't there? But you can sort of see where people are not happy. But often they have to be professional and very amicable.
Yeah, those final statements that are released on websites where people are wished well for the future, but maybe the preceding lines were, the reading between the preceding lines might give you more of an indication as to how the relationship actually ended.
You have about 2 lines. If you have about 2 lines, we'd like to thank for your efforts. That's it.
Well, wish you well for your future. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So it's interesting, isn't it? Obviously, having both gone through the process and gone through that experience, what is actually interesting now is when you read someone leaving, you can sort of try and second guess or read between the lines of the scenario. But from my experience, certainly most clubs are incredibly amicable and actually very professional in those moments when it does end. Yeah,
and I think they also have to be careful about how they almost are pitching themselves to future managers, don't they? If they are seen to act in an unbecoming way or unprofessionally, it's not going to give anybody else who's going into that situation a lot of trust in that this could be held at the same levels of professionalism that other clubs have been doing it.
No, absolutely. I think the one that I can think of in recent times, and it was quite an interesting, which you very rarely see, was Forest Green. Was Troy Deeney obviously left, and the owner and Troy sort of had a bit of a war of words, didn't they, publicly? And I thought that was quite unusual. And again, I'm not judging that situation. I know Troy to chat to, sort of on some of the media duties I've done. I don't know the Forest Green owner. And I don't know the circumstances around it, but it was quite an unusual thing to sort of hear and see that, because normally it's very, very, very sort of amicable and it's all usually fine, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a playbook of how to do it. I think everybody goes by the playbook, but then I suppose, as you say, it would be really interesting to see that kind of stuff play out, but only because of some morbid fascination for seeing actually how it all goes. A bit of a soap opera to see those kind of wars maybe play out. And perhaps with something like the behind the scenes series that we're starting to see, the all or nothing Sunderland till I die kind of things. Maybe that's going to give us more of an indication as to what really went on, as opposed to what people thought went on, and then maybe what wasn't spoken about when they were all leaving.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge, I think those documentaries are brilliant. I think they really open the eyes to some of the stuff that goes on. I think there's still an element of, you don't know how much editorial control clubs have, or maybe none at all. But I think there's always still that, one or two moments where you think, okay, has that been set up a little bit, or has that been sort of shaped in a certain way? And I mean, you have to still take them all with a little pinch of salt as to how certain people are perceived. But yeah, they're interesting, aren't they? They're really good to get that sort of behind the scenes look. And we spoke about it before, haven't we? Of, how long is it before, that kind of locker room mentality that you seem to get in US sports comes to the UK. And I mean, you preempted that a little bit, Dave, didn't you? I think a couple of weeks later, they were trying to interview the managers again in the dugout and trying to interview the managers on the way in. And I think it's because we're all fascinated by some of those moments, aren't we? Even though us that are involved in the game, you're still fascinated to see some of them behind the scenes moments, because the match is the match and we all love watching the match, but actually some of the bits that the nuances and some of the bits that sort of glue all those pieces together are really fascinating.
Well, I know we're pivoting a little bit off the question here, but in the era where everybody is media trained within an inch of their lives, how do we as the audience, if I flip onto the other side now, and how does the audience get more of the raw emotion? And maybe you've got to go to those moments closer to the game where the emotions are still real. If the player's still on the pitch, they've not got to the dressing room, the manager's coming out at half time and you're having to answer questions in the middle of the game or immediately after the game, where you haven't had time to collect your thoughts and think about how you're going to present things. Maybe that's the nuggets of real emotion that people want to see.
Yeah, I think like you say, that's always a challenge to see which bits are a little bit contrived and which bits are, actual and real, raw parts of it. I think that's what people want to see. That it's a really interesting one, because I've always felt sometimes that, just say how it is, and actually sometimes that can work against you occasionally. I think if you try to be honest, if you try to say how it is in the raw emotions after a game, then those are the moments where you actually can be criticised the most. And it's a shame in some ways, because that is just honesty. That is just how you feel in that moment. Why shouldn't a manager or a player? Yeah, I mean, you've seen it recently. I don't know if you watched the Tottenham Man City game, but some of the bits of the moment are like quite unusual, aren't they? I mean, the reaction from some of I don't know if it's just a game and it was highlighted because of the magnitude of the game for different reasons, but you've had Bentancur coming off and smashing his foot into the dugout, which was quite a strange thing. Look, okay, raw passion of is it because he doesn't want to come off? Is it because they're not winning? Whatever it is, but it's not a good look, is it? For the fans and young fans out there. And then you had Edison. Is it Edison?
Edison coming off, yeah, with his head.
You had Edison coming off, and obviously at that point he probably realises that with the concussion protocol he's going to miss the last game of the season. So maybe all of those factors are going into his mind, because the fact he actually stayed on suggested that he couldn't have been properly concussed, and then taking him off a couple of minutes later seemed a little bit strange. But then he realises, of course, that he's not going to be playing in the last game. So his reaction was very unusual as well, wasn't it? So, but in a way, those reactions are very real, because most of the time players coming off are probably going to hide their thoughts and hold their emotions in, because often players would react like that, wouldn't they? Whether it's right or wrong, they're just humans with disappointment or frustration like everyone else would. The fans would react in a way. If you concede a goal, you look into the stadium and you see some of the reactions that you know, real, aren't they? The real emotion and the anger and the frustration and the joy. And, you know, when a player or a manager shows that, sometimes the criticism comes your way. So it is a fine balance.
Well, maybe I've got a little bit more of a cynical view of these things nowadays, but as all of this stuff is media worthy, it's all great for social media as well, that you can show that you care more, you're angrier, you're more emotionally attached to either the crowd. So the crowd boo if you're taken off, then you show even more frustration. It almost aligns you to the emotions of a crowd, and almost the fact that you're not happy with the situation either. I think it's really difficult now, but I think we've ended off on a tangent there. So we'll just close that one up. I think yes, certainly when you're leaving a club, you're there's a little bit of a gag order. I don't know if anyone's ever tested it by just saying, you know what, I don't want the money, but I want to tell the stories. Maybe they'll earn more money in the future by just going to the media and telling all kind of kiss and tell. Let's call it like that. Anyway, we move on to Callum Bradke, who's come in with an interesting question. Maybe it's a little bit more, you know, I'll start with answering the question that I'm going to ask you and answer it myself.
Sorry, cool question.
Yeah. Or is it?
I don't know.
When you have a Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday fixture schedule, what is the sort of weekly plan for the squad? Can you afford a rest day? And it's a great question, and it comes up an awful lot when we speak to fans, when they want to know, like, just exactly how do you train a team when you have a 3-game week. And over the years, we've done it lots of different ways, haven't we? It will depend sometimes on the time of year and the density of the fixture list that you're in. So quite often we can end up in 2 or 3 week blocks of double game weeks, in which case you have to look at, yes, every game in isolation and each week, but you're also looking at where that sits within the season, aren't you? You know, so right at the start of the season, for example, we'll always start off with a 3-game week. We'll always start off with the first game, a cup match, and another game. But of course, it's the start of the season, so nobody's particularly fatigued. Everyone should be particularly fresh and ready to go. You'll normally have a full squad available, and you've only been back in for maybe about 6 or 7 weeks. So nobody's really pining for an awful lot of time off at that stage. So quite often in those situations, we'll be in every day. Post game, we'll come in, we'll recover, won't we? And then we'll prepare and train, getting ready for the midweek game. Then we'll repeat that and get ready for the game of the weekend. Maybe in around Christmas time, when we were kind of halfway through the season and we played 25 odd games, sometimes at that stage, you're also thinking about how much traveling you've been doing, how much time people have been in consecutively, and maybe you've got a squad that's had a lot of players who've been just squad members not getting on the pitch. So you're also thinking about what's the best way to recover. Do you need to take the players into the training ground, bring all of the staff in, grounds people, the chefs and everybody in order to achieve a 1-hour recovery session? Or you better sometimes giving people time socially at home with their families, still doing the recovery, but just on a remote basis. So we've done it lots of different ways. It'll just depend on lots of different circumstances that we have to balance.
Okay, so let's flip it back. So if it's a Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday, how would you often shape that week from a training / recovery? Like, what would the days, not necessarily what would each day look like, but, you know, what just in terms of hard day, easy day, recovery day, you know, how would a Saturday, Tuesday normally look?
Well, let's look at the starting players first of all, because we'll put them in one category. We'll have some players who will go through all 3 games and play in all 3 games. So they'll obviously play the 90 minutes on the Saturday. We'll start the recovery immediately after the game. We'll continue that the following day on the Sunday. And then on the Monday will be a general kind of match preparation session. It'll be low to medium intensity. We're still recovering in some ways from the game on the Saturday, because we know that it's normally 48 hours after a game. Players are still quite sore. But we're also having to try and get them out there, get them ready for the game that's happening the following evening. So with those guys, they tend to, have a pretty normal pattern going into that second game. For the non-starters, normally straight after the game, you'll see it on TV a lot when you're watching the post-match kind of breakdown. You'll see players out on the pitch doing some additional conditioning after the game, because we're trying to prepare them to be ready for the next game, but we also need to do that as far away from the next game as possible, because we don't want them having fatigue if they are selected on the Tuesday night game. So we're going to give them as much of the hard work that we can isolated straight after the game. Now, unfortunately for those players, it's a lot of running. It's a lot of straight line running up and down on pitches all over the country, but it's the best time for us to get that work in, which means it doesn't influence the next game. And then on a Sunday morning, we'll normally have that non-starter group and maybe players who've had less or limited minutes in the game, and they'll train. And they'll train quite intensely on that Sunday because, again, we're trying to get some work in that keeps them at a level of conditioning so they're ready for any and however many games they may be selected for in the future. But also ensuring that it's not just an athletics club that all they're doing is running. They need football training as well. So we get the coaches out there, we do some more training, and then everybody will be on the same level really on a Monday. Again, some of those non-starters might do a little bit extra work. Once you've played the Tuesday night game, we're essentially repeating that again. The only difference really being that because we've got one extra day in between the games, from a Tuesday to a Saturday, that the Thursday session, which would be 2 days after a game, can actually be a little bit harder for those guys. So we can normally pull in, say, the under-21 team or whatever, and we can do some simulated game work, some larger area spaces for training, because if everything's just short and in tight spaces, it doesn't really prepare them for the game. So constantly we're trying to think about how we have those non-starters ready if called upon.
Where do you... So it's been an interesting one because we've had this sort of experience recently where, football traditionally has tended to have, maybe like, let's say in a normal week, maybe a Sunday off and a Wednesday, let's say 2 days a week off.
Yeah.
Where, like most people in most businesses would perhaps have the weekend off, or they might have a half day and then one of the days off of the weekend. But most people wouldn't be in working 6 days a week, would they, or 7 days a week, and traveling late out. Some people would, depending on the job. But where do you think, do you think it's changing? Where previously it used to be just a day off. Do you think there's a bigger demand now on recovery? Obviously, sports science, performance. Everyone's looking for the extra sort of edge. Everyone's looking for, to do it a little bit more professionally, perhaps like some of the other sports, which we spoke about a lot before, haven't we, in one of the other episodes. Do you think that day off now is becoming less and less, and it's becoming more an active recovery day or different modalities to do that?
Yeah, I think we've certainly seen that, in the continent. It's survived there for a long time, where that expectation of almost being, you weren't getting days off, you were getting time off in between training sessions. And they would just be compartmentalized into, yes, you'll have Sunday afternoon off, then you might have all day on Monday off, and then you might come in on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of German model that we've seen. And it's been quite successfully employed here by a lot of coaches who've chosen to go that way. I suppose what's different in the UK and why it's always been referred to as the English model of having a Sunday off and a Wednesday off was because of the amount of games. Just traditionally, especially in below the Premier League level, you've got 8 more games every season. You enter the cup normally a couple of rounds earlier sometimes in some of the competitions. So you can easily see a championship team or League One team playing 50 games a season, and that doesn't always happen on the continent. So the time off that has traditionally happened here is because there's been so many games that if you were just in all the time, you'd never have any time off. And we'll also have to think about, how that affects family and friends and social relationships as well. So I think that's why that's always survived in this country. What's happened in the last decade or so, as more and more foreign orientated coaches have come in who've used those kind of European models, is that's their expectation. It's the expectation of the players as well. They expect that they're in to recover. They're not used to this English model as such of having a Sunday off and a Wednesday off. For them, a lot of the time is, no, I'm a professional footballer, I'm a professional athlete. I expect to be in, I expect to recover better, I expect to prepare better, eat better. And we've certainly seen that push forward now in the Premier League, and it's now in the Championship, and it's now starting to creep its way into some of the lower leagues as well, where obviously if you're getting rewarded quite well, then the club is probably in its power going to say, well, for the reward you're getting, we also have more expectation on you. So this is going to be your new future.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? But a lot of the foreign players that we've worked with, we had it at Millwall, didn't we? We realised to Zian and Fogey, people like that. But, often if there was a day off on a Wednesday, they would come in anyway. And actually, the more young British coaches that have worked under a European coach or whoever that might be, often they will then use that as their way of doing things. So I think it's definitely changing, isn't it? I still think there's a lot of clubs that have still been successful on that kind of old Sunday, Wednesday off model. I know Premier League clubs that have done that and still been successful. And I know a lot of clubs that have done 5-day build-up and been really unsuccessful. I think it depends on how you do it, but I think it's definitely the norm now. It's getting more demanding time-wise, isn't it? And I think that's, like you say, because of the riches involved in the game that are creeping further down. There are League One and League Two players out there that are earning an incredibly good living out of the game. And so therefore the clubs want a little bit more from them, and rightly so. And often the players want more from themselves, don't they? Often it's the players that are driving it, not just the clubs. They want to be better. They want to maximise their opportunity within a short career, don't they? So but it's interesting to see how different people do different ways of a training week, dependent on, when the games are. Of course, now it's not just Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday. I mean, that question probably should have been asked 10 years ago. And it should have been Sunday morning, Monday night, Wednesday early evening, and then a Friday night, because the games are completely different now, aren't they? So one of the challenges we've often found is it's not Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday. It's, Saturday, Tuesday, Sunday, Wednesday. Suddenly it's actually hard to find a rhythm in terms of your training, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's probably the price we've all paid for the increased media money that's come into the game, is the media have decided when they want games to be played. So I think it was about 5 years ago where we saw Sky decide that the Championship was going to be split into midweek fixtures, and you would have, say, 4 midweek fixtures that were on a Tuesday before midweek fixtures that were on a Wednesday. So suddenly that was altering your preparation for games. What your normal pattern was before is now gone out the window. And also, you might end up playing a team that's had more rest time than you. On the flip side, you might start playing a team that's had less rest time than you. So that also added pressure, didn't it? Because if you had an extra day's rest, then the expectation from everybody on the outside was, well, you should be able to run all over these because, you've had more rest than them. But that didn't always manifest itself like that. But yeah, we certainly see, I think Jurgen Klopp will not bemoan missing the 12:30 Saturday lunchtime kickoff that he seemed to have had just like carved into chisel. That must have been on his contract when he joined Liverpool. You will have every Saturday 12:30 kickoff, no matter what, no matter where.
He's going to have to ponder that while he's on the beach for a year.
Yeah. He's got a tough act to follow in himself there, isn't he? 12:30 kickoffs. But anyway, great question there from Callum. And it's certainly one that we have to challenge ourselves with every year. Again, each club's individual, isn't it? When you sometimes have all of the players quite local to your club, if you're in a regional area where they're all living within 20 minutes of the training ground, it's quite easy. When you're at some clubs where players can be maybe an hour and a half away just because of affordability. Even though some of them earn a good amount of money, they can't afford to live where the training ground is. So they have to travel. And suddenly you're thinking, are we getting what we want from this situation? They might be traveling 3 hours a day for like a 45-minute to 1 hour recovery session.
Yeah, well, we did that at Millwall, didn't we? A lot. We start having sort of remote Zoom recoveries because actually, like you say, sometimes you can live 6 or 7 miles away from the training ground. It take you an hour and a quarter stuck in traffic, but that's a terrible recovery protocol for a player a day after a game, isn't it? So actually, you have to work around the circumstances that you have, don't you? So yeah, different clubs dictate different solutions, I think. But again, you have an ideal way of doing it, don't you? Try and work back from that.
Okay, right. So we're going to leave that one now. I think we've done that one to death. I'm going to skip the next question because I think it's worth coming back to a similar topic to that in a future episode of this. And I'm going to pivot completely here. Ben Culliff, who's asked, Gary, who is the best player you have ever managed or worked with in your career, in your opinion?
Oh, that's such a difficult question. I think there's
like you can't use me when I've joined in with those, I'd show. Obviously, I could. Well,
okay, I'll leave Dave Carolan out then as the answer to that. Really difficult question to answer. I think there's another question in there where it says, "Who's the best team you've played with, and the best team you've managed?" So, because I think it's so...
Well, let's mix those together then. I think it covers both, doesn't it?
Okay. So, right. So, again, the one you've managed is really difficult because players out there, there's so many... I always find that when you work with a lot of good players and a lot of good characters, it almost feels incredibly unfair just to pick 11 of them because that looks like you don't value the other 11. So, I'll tell you what I'm going to do with this. I'm just going to stick with the ones that I've played with.
Okay.
I mean, it's the way of doing it. So, So I picked this is what I've done. I picked my best played with 11, right? And this is I don't think I'm going to get anyone ringing in saying they're really unhappy. I might get the odd text from an ex-teammate that says, I can't believe I didn't make that team. But anyway, right. So here goes, Dave.
So this is from Connor Wilkinson, 94, who asked, who is your favorite 11 you've played with?
Yeah, so I'm gonna sort of the worked with bit. I'll come back to that one because I think if you look at that one, you look at players. I tend to look at players. So I'll segment it a little bit. So the first one, best players you worked with, and I look back to some of the successful ones. So I think of people like Demari Gray when he was just coming through at Birmingham, super talented player. And really good to work with because, he obviously had that skill base and the attitude as well. So I think the likes of him, Shay Adams, who we brought in, who did really, really well and got sold for a lot of profit. Zian, the same, someone who wants to work. And also someone like a Matty Vidra, who, was on the cusp of sort of training with the under-23s and we brought him back and he ended up, I think, top scorer that season. So there's a lot of pleasure with someone like that, and I'm sure you would.
This is not going to help your reputation as a defensively minded coach, like naming 4 really, really strong attacking players. You know what I mean?
You wouldn't think we actually work with some attackers. We're just some of people's opinion. Vidra, top scorer in the division. Was that the year that we were 3rd top scoring in the championship?
I can't possibly comment.
Defensive team, yeah, okay. Yeah, and then you've got other players like I'm just thinking of like people like Lucas Djukovic, John Massinho, Bradley Johnson, Jake Cooper, people like that who are perhaps not as eye-catching in terms of some of the things that they do, but actually brilliant lads to work with and certainly like a pleasure every day to turn up because of their character and what they do for the other players. So that's sort of, I try and answer that one really quickly because there's so many other players that you could choose and there's so many people that you could, right, I'm going to go to my best played with 11. So, right, this is like a fantasy football, but not a very good one.
Okay.
I've got Neville Southall in goal. So when I was at Everton as a young player, Neville Southall, what an absolute
artist.
You know what? he nearly made the team outfield because on a Friday he would often join. Very unusual. He'd often join in with the five-a-sides, and he was brilliant. He'd nutmeg people. He'd like you, Dave. He's like you in a shape session. You couldn't control his skill. Yeah, so I'm going Neville Southall in goal, right? I'm going to do what a lot of people do, which is very egotistical, but to save me having to pick a right back, I'm picking myself.
Picking himself for right back. Okay.
Picking myself. And then I've got Igor Stimac at centre back. Top player, top character. Just his belief on the ball. Like I used to say this, he'd receive the ball, he'd hit a diagonal, it'd go out of play, and it would not bother him. He'd just go and get another one off the keeper. Well, he wouldn't, because it'd be a throw-in, of course, but he'd get another one off the keeper the next time, and it would not affect him. He was a top player.
That was Derby, was it? Igor Stimac?
That was a Derby. Yeah, another Everton one, Dave Watson, big old grizzled centre-half who top centre-back, great leader. Brilliant player. So, and then at left back, I've gone for a back four because I get fed up with being defensive back five. So I've gone a bit more attacking with this one. And I had a top between Chrissy Powell and Paul Konchesky. And actually both at the time, Conch was coming through a young player, I had everything. But Chrissy's got my nod just because he was a top, well, he still is, of course, top lad. Midfield now, this is getting a little bit harder. So I've got
really interested to see which way you're going here, like what balance you've gone for. Okay.
Yeah.
What side you gone for the back? Where you gone for in midfield then?
I've gone 4-3-3. I've gone 4-3-3 to give a little bit of freedom to the team, of course. You know, this team hasn't been picked based on defensive quality, so on this bit now. So Scotty Barker, one of the best I've ever seen at getting the ball back, and obviously very good in possession as well. Was a young player at Charlton coming through, and alongside him another Charlton. It's amazing. I've got quite a lot of Charlton players. Klaus Jensen, brilliant footballer, fantastic on the ball. And really offered something very different. Alongside him in that kind of number 8 role, I've gone for another former Derby player, and was actually played under a lot of top managers at AC Milan. So Stefano Aranio. I had a toss up between Baiano and Aranio, two Italian players I played with at Derby. I think we were 4th in the Premier League for a lot of that season. He was absolutely top drawer. I remember a keeper zinging one out to him once, and the fullback closed him down, and he literally on the volley just lifted it over the fullback's head, strolled round him, and just took the ball the other side in a Premier League game. And I thought, oh my God, that is sheer composure. So anyway, I've gone
very DC like that kind of burger. I like that.
It was. So that's a 4, that's a 3. I mean, I need a front 3. So I've gone for a big, massive name drop clanger here. But afterwards, I did actually see him at a hotel, and he remembered me, which I was very surprised about. But I've got Roberto Mancini in a front 3, who actually came on loan to Leicester for 3 months, and I've got to say was one of the most technically brilliant players I think I've ever seen. And he would have been about 34, 35 at the time.
Yeah.
But just like, you just could not get the ball off him. So anyway, so he's going in a front 3. I put Dean Sturridge in there because, again, at the time at Derby, Studge was absolutely the Premier League up. Yeah, as a young striker. So, and what I've done is I haven't gone total football here. So I've tried to sort of mix my team up a little bit and have a bit of everything in. So I had a choice up front, played with a lot of good strikers, but I went for Big Dunk at Everton. So I put Big Dunk in as a number 9. So I thought, you know what, if we can't get the ball to Aranio, can't get the ball to Jensen, worst case, we can bash it up to Big Dunk, and he can take you prisoners with him physically. So yeah, but you know what? He was also technically very good as well. So he had a little bit of everything. So I've also put Big Dunk in because if it was a night out, I'd want to be going with him. That's why I'm in the team, you know, for both professional and social reasons. So yeah, that's my team. I've no doubt missed a few out. So yeah, maybe one of the other I don't know if you've got it now, Dave, but maybe one of the other episodes we do of this, we could come up with your best team you've worked with, best 11. Yeah, that'd be an interesting one. Not from attitude point. Yours might be more attitude based, or
oh no,
well, it might.
Well, I haven't played with them. I mean, obviously, it was really funny back in the day, just pivoting onto that, because squads were a little bit smaller, and you quite often get asked to join in like the Friday kickabout. I know it's like we obviously have enough players nowadays, and you always have the 21s there and all that. But back then, like, it was, if you only carried a smaller squad because you didn't have 9 subs, did you? So you might have only had a squad of 20, and then if you had a few had injured or they're off playing at a reserve game or something like that, you join in. So I've actually mixed up with a few of those guys, but yeah, I've got a real problem picking like a front 2, 3, 4, even 8, because there's been a few decent ones in there, but yeah. It'd be interesting if we pitched our teams against each other.
There you go. What? Yeah, make the life. Someone can choose the score.
Well, obviously,
pick both teams on Football Manager and see which one wins, or however we do that. FIFA.
Maybe we'll throw it over to the audience. Pick the best 11 from the 2 11s. Let's do that. Okay. So thanks for that. Good team selection. Right, we've got one more question for this episode. So let's have a look at... right, this is a really, really good question here from Harry Sims 95. I don't know if Harry plays The Sims or whatever it might be, but here we go. How does a club submit a transfer bid? Is there a computer system, or is there a simple email to the other club? How does that work? So great question, Harry, about how clubs actually submit transfer bids.
Yeah, I can only go with how I think it, because obviously I'm not the person sending in that email or send it. I'm not a sort of football secretary or however that works. So usually what would happen is, so you've got your sort of director of football role, whatever that sort of term, whether that's director of football or head of football operations or whatever that might be. Technical director, but you've got that person, you've got the chief exec, and you've got the manager or the head coach, whichever way you want to look at it. So normally what would happen is there would be obviously discussions to get that sort of target, who we're going to go for. And obviously these are a different conversation, but who we're going to go for, he's the main target. What do we think his valuation is, what we're prepared to pay? At that point, obviously, the director of football and the manager have probably had a good conversation with either the player or the agent, or however that works. That their club potentially would be open to sell. Now, often what you get at that point is you wouldn't get a figure, but you get an idea of maybe where a figure would be. Often that could come from the agent and be completely false, because the agent would want you to put a bid in so that if you can find out that figure, he's got another 4 clubs that are interested in the player as well. So often they would elicit an offer to go in, because that would actually help their scenario, which is fine. But let's just say this is a direct one-to-one conversation between clubs. Usually the director of football would talk to their director of football and say, hey, look, we have a real interest. What would you be prepared to sell him? What sort of level? Both would skirt around, the selling club wouldn't want to give too definitive a fee. But they might want to give a bit of encouragement. The buying club wouldn't want to be too definitive on how much they would pay, because, of course, it's a negotiation. So at that point, the selling club would often say, well, put an offer in, and you would have to do that by writing. So you would normally put that in an email form, either from the CEO, chief exec, or the director of football, whoever that might be.
Yeah.
So put an offer in, and it'd be like buying a house, essentially, from that point. You would put an offer in probably a little bit lower where you want to end up. They would then come back with a counter offer. Sometimes, again, clubs are quite strategic. As a manager, you're kind of sat there going, come on, we need to try and get this deal done. And they would wait 3 or 4 days before they respond to that first offer, because they don't want to look too keen.
Nice.
And that's quite often, when you look like you're trying to sign a player or trying to sell a player, particularly this time of the year around sort of middle of May, you could put an offer in of a player and want to buy a player, a club could want to sell a player, but it could take 3 or 4 weeks of just, people don't want to come back too quick. It takes 4 or 5 days. They come back and say no. You don't want to go back in straight away because it looks too. So often this could be so protracted. I've often done it in the past when I was at Burton and I used to do a lot of the negotiations as a manager, because obviously you didn't have a director of football there and that's how you did it. And often I would just say, hey, listen, I'm not going to go through 3 or 4 emails to negotiate. I'll give you our best price now. This is what we're prepared to pay. Give me a yes or no so we can save all the hassle. And sometimes that would actually work. A team would go, okay, fair enough. And you get to a decision quite quick. Okay. You don't know whether you're maybe overpaying for that player, but ultimately to me, you can see where it's probably going to end up anyway. Both clubs know roughly where it's going to end up. So often I would circumvent that and just go straight in. And once people know you're not messing about with that, they actually decide, they go, okay, well, this is how they work. And a lot of other clubs would spend a lot longer doing that. I could think of an example. I won't give too much specifics, but, last summer we had a Premier League club wanted to buy one of our players. And it must have took about 4 weeks to get to a situation where, either club knew where each club stood. And by that point, it was almost sort of dead in the water anyway, because everyone had kind of moved on. So yeah, it can take that long. It can be that difficult, but most clubs would do it via conversation first. That would have to then be formalised into an email. That would then have to be agreed, not agreed. And at the point of being agreed, then there's all the other formalities, subject to medical, subject to, agents' fees, subject to players' terms. I would say most of the times the offer's gone in, players' terms would have been loosely agreed anyway between the agent and the club. So yeah, that's my understanding of it. I would imagine someone at the sharper end of the process, a director of football, maybe at some point we can get a director of football on and we can ask him some of these questions. That would be quite interesting to get a little bit more detailed nuance of it.
Yeah, you make a great point there about it's like buying a house, isn't it? I suppose the one thing when you're buying or selling a house is what your valuation is of your property. You kind of know what the market's telling you as well. So just before we talk about whether, directors of football or that, would they have a valuation on every player ready to go, almost what they would accept, what they would push to, but in reality, what they're going to be willing to allow the player to go for if they get that level? Of course, they're going to want to push for more, but are you as a head coach also knowing that if a player is of a certain valuation, that potentially you're going to lose them anyway? You spoke about Damari Gray earlier in the episode. Was there a situation where you knew if Birmingham were offered X amount by X club, he was going to leave? Irrespective.
Yeah, in that situation, I think he had a buyout clause anyway of a relevant figure, which he knew someone would probably meet that summer.
Okay.
And so, but I think the point you make is a really good one, that most clubs should, and I think most clubs do, but not perhaps all, most clubs would have a rough valuation of each player. Most clubs, they probably need to do that for P&S anyway. But most clubs would also have a list of players that should someone come in for that said player or one of those players, that this is a level we would look for, or this is the players that we would look for to replace. So you've almost got a succession plan. A lot of clubs do that for a manager. They have a manager in place, but they look at the next manager. They have a list of perhaps who they would see as their next manager. And again, I think that's good planning. What you can't, I suppose, mitigate for is sometimes you could do all of those things as a director of football and a chief exec. And you're, it must have been a late night. And a lot of the owners, because a lot of the owners are multi-millionaire, multi-billionaire people, they could sit around at any given point and say, do you know what? Yeah, okay, they're offering 10 million, but I don't need the money. So I don't want to say that. You could plan to a point where you have a level that you all agree, maybe someone activates that level, and an owner who obviously is his club and it's his money essentially could turn around and say he doesn't want to do it. So I think there's different parameters around it, but I think most clubs roughly know where they are. Of course, you get a little bit you get 2 or 3 clubs wanting one of your players. That's perfect, and at that point you might get a little bit greedy because you think you can. And again, like a house, I suppose the difference with a house is that house is definitely for sale, whereas sometimes you could try and buy a player, and most clubs don't say this player is for sale this summer. Put your best bids in. They don't do that. We've had it somewhere where you put 3 or 4 bids in, you get told by the agent and the player that they want to move, and the club say, actually, we've decided we don't want to sell him now. Yeah. And that is why a lot of these situations are so protracted in the summer, and people get so frustrated with, because they perhaps don't understand some of the nuances that go and the challenges that go with it.
Yeah, sometimes though you get those leaflets coming through your letterbox which say, "Did you know your house is worth this?" And you go, "Really? Okay, well, I might consider moving." In which case, the odd agent, I'm sure, has, let's just say, stimulated the waters, posted something through somebody else's letterbox to ensure that they create a little bit of turbulence, let's call it like that. Maybe that might create the situation where the player wants to leave, or, somebody suddenly is asking the question. Let's put that.
Very interesting. I like it.
Well, anyway, look, we got through about 5 or 6 questions there around lots of different topics, from a weekly schedule to your best 11 that you've played in, that you play in yourself. So, any other right backs out there, unlucky, into transfer bids. So I think it's been really useful. So, yeah, we've got so many more questions still on the list that we'll have to go around to in another episode. But for now, I think, thanks for the first episode of Whistleblowers. Hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, definitely a regular feature, isn't it? And some brilliant questions.
Yeah, happy days. All right, I'm going off now to select my best 11 if that comes up in the next episode. Thanks for joining us, Gary.
It's like